exam one, well, except for, actually, no, that's a lie. Slight change. Exam one, quizzes part 2, November 19th, end of day. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th, end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, end of day, on the day that shall live in infamy. Exam 5, the final if you need it, December 14th, well, still the final if you need it or not. December 14th, deadline at noon, and the rest are end of day. For the paper, draft deadline November 9th, plus off deadline November 14th, emergency deadline November 21st, and desperation deadline December 8th. Because we haven't finished Aristotle yet, quiz 4 covering Aristotle, quiz 5 covering all of part 1. Then there's like an extra quiz. The best 10 quizzes count, so more the better. Deadline is Friday, September 28th.
You say you sent me the paper that I asked you about.
Yep.
But I still haven't seen it. And I keep looking for it.
Okay, I'll check my email me to remind me to do it, and I'll just forward the original email. It might end up in your, if you have like a junk mail or spam folder, it might be in there.
Okay.
Because it may like family's asking for some money or something. Better block that.
But I've been checking, because I'm trying to
Oh, sure.
find out how to go about this thing. Oh.
Okay, before heading to our new stuff, which is old stuff with Aristotle, anything about any of the previous stuff, stuff to be or stuff that needs more stuff?
Okay, now printing out these pages.
Mm-hmm.
What pages we on there?
I'm on, this is 27, page 27. Okay, so last time we're looking at some of the critical concepts for Aristotle, and two of the critical concepts, which we'll see more in the future when we start talking about God and Thomas Aquinas, is potentiality and actuality. Now, to have something potentially means what?
Possible.
Yeah,
Possibility of
yeah, you don't got it, but you could have it. And of course, actuality means
it. You actually have it.
yeah, you do actually have it. So if you're on your way to graduation, you're potential graduates, but if you already graduated from something, you're also actual graduates, but just different, in a different area. Now, for Aristotle, his mechanism of change involves those two concepts. So if something changes, it goes from being potentially whatever it's changing into to actually being that. So if something is changing from cold to warm, it goes from being actually warm, which is potentially cold, to actually cold. And so Aristotle's model is all this shifting from potential to actual. And later this is grabbed onto by Thomas Aquinas in his famous 5 words, which we will see in the future. Now, as we saw, Aristotle makes a association of potentiality with the prime matter, materia prima. And so going back to the metaphors, if you want an old style metaphor, you get that the prime matter is like clay, and the forms is like molds, molding the clay into the shapes. Or if you want a more contemporary one, the prime matter is like a spool of plastic for a 3D printer, and the forms are like the files you put in the printer to print out the shapes. And so anything that's got actuality has a capacity to change, because it can go from being potentially something to actually something. Now, if something is pure actuality, and we'll see this with Thomas Aquinas, like God, then it would not be able to change, except in the case of, you know, a perfect being for the worst. I wouldn't do that, but more in the future. Now, Aristotle laid out this theory of change, this notion of four causes. And they're important for all of Aristotle's stuff. In the case of metaphysics, all of them are important. In the case of ethics, only one is important. And here are the causes. First cause, and at first glance this may seem like not a cause, but it actually is this, what he calls the material cause. And this is the matter that makes up the thing. Now in this case, we generally think of cause as not being like this. When we think of a cause, you generally probably think of something doing something to something else. Like, you know, me causing the backpack to move, or the rocket causing the target to explode, or the sandwich, you know, causing your tummy to be full of sandwichness. Or former sandwichness. I guess it's technically not a sandwich when it's in your stomach unless you eat it whole. But anyways, whole philosophy of sandwiches out there somewhere, I'm sure. But when you think about it, if you think of cause in the sense of, you know, but for, which is also a legal definition of cause, that you couldn't have, say, the backpack without the matter that makes it up. So part of the, you know, explanation of the backpack as to it being it requires bringing in the matter. No matter, no backpack. So for Aristotle, one cause is that material cause. The second type is what it translates as efficient cause, which is kind of a not so great use, because normally if you heard the term efficient cause, you would think what?
Productive.
Yeah, very productive. That it gets a lot out of, you know, whatever you put into it, you get a lot out of, like fuel efficiency. But unfortunately, it doesn't mean anything like that. What does it mean? Well, for Aristotle, the efficient cause is the origin of the process that produced it. For example, the efficient
Which will be the form, right?
Well, for Aristotle, the form is, a form could be this, but he considers the form to be a third type of cause, so one of the causes. So as an example, the efficient cause of the child would be the parents, or the efficient cause of the backpack would be whoever stitched it all together. And this is the cause that makes something go from potentially to actually. So presumably in the factory, you know, the backpack at some point was just a bunch of, you know, unconnected parts, and then someone had to combine them together to produce the backpack. And of course you could go through any stage of the process, like to be this panel, it had to go from being like the raw materials to this shape, etc. So, formal or material cause, efficient cause. Now to formal cause. Now normally think of formal, think of what? Yeah, formal wear. Like this is the you know, the cause that wears a tux. You know, cause, James Cause. Bond reference. Terrible Bond reference. So. Now, the formal cause is the essence of the thing. So this is, as the name implies, the form actualized, making it making it what it is. So, for example, with the backpack, it would be the form of backpack. Now, in the case of something like a 3D printer, or like construction that uses, you know, computer models, you get a very good metaphor. So if you were printing, say, a little plastic dragon on a 3D printer, that file that, you know, lays out all the design for that dragon would be, you know, the form. That is what transforms the plastic into that actualized shape, or whatever it is you're printing.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
How does this one differ from the efficient?
Oh, the efficient cause would be whatever the origin of it is. So, for example, the parents, on Aristotle's view, wouldn't be the formal cause of the child, because they're not the form. They would just be the process that made it. So like the person assembling the backpack would not be the formal cause, using the metaphor. The idea, roughly put, the plan of the backpack that they're following would be the formal cause, and they would be the efficient cause because they're assembling the parts together.
So the efficient is just the one that puts it together, brings it forth, and the form is the one that makes the matter was.
Yeah, I mean, to use the metaphor of,
I'm following.
okay. That's such a good metaphor. Now, the final cause for Aristotle, which is literally the final cause, is the final cause. Now, normally think of final as what?
Last.
Yeah, last. Like this is like the last, the last cause. Now, again, these are due to maybe kind of unfortunate translations. What he means is this. The final cause is a thing's end, purpose, or function. Namely, what it is for. Now, Aristotle believed, obviously, that things that humans make do have functions. We build things to have functions. So the function of a backpack is, carrying stuff. So if you ask, like, why is there a backpack? What's the cause? Well, one explanation is, well, it exists to carry my stuff. Yeah, so things that we make have functions. Now, Aristotle believed beyond this, that not just things we make have functions, but even natural objects have functions, ends, and purposes. So, for example, now he doesn't think that, like, the squirrels are plotting against us. Well, maybe he did, because they are. That's totally true.
The squirrels are plotting against it.
Just look at them. They're shifty. Shifty
I
creatures.
asked you about that one.
True. Now, he doesn't mean that, like, acorns have, like, plans and goals and so forth. What he means by this is not, that acorns are, like, intelligently doing stuff, or that apples are, like, guiding themselves to the ground when they fall. What he means is that everything has a goal or end that it's aiming for. So in the case of an acorn, its end game is what? Yeah, see the squirrels. Yeah, I mean, their goal is to become, true. Because Aristotle is trying to answer the question. One of the questions is, why do acorns grow into trees and not into flamingos? Now we know the answer, DNA, etc. But before then, they needed an explanation.
Really?
And one account is, well, that's its function or purpose. It's got that end built into it. Now again, with natural stuff, Aristotle doesn't think that there is an intelligent being directing this. He thinks, in a way, crudely put, they're self-directing that. And again, it's a problem in physics. In actually all the sciences. How does stuff work? I mean, people would ask the question, how do the trees know when it's fall to change color? How do the geese know when it's time to fly, south or wherever they fly to? And this is sort of the beginning of getting those answers. Now, because of this notion of final cause, Aristotle, of course, believed in a teleological universe. Going back to the bumper stickers, if you're a teleologist, your bumper sticker would say everything happens for a reason, as opposed to stuff just happens. Now, telos is Greek for end or goal. So for Aristotle, the world is a collection of processes, all of which are aimed at fulfilling various objectives, various ends. Everything has a goal it's trying to accomplish. Now again, he doesn't say that there's like an intelligence in an acorn or intelligence in water. It's built into the process. So in a way, you could see his view as perhaps ironically consistent with, say, evolution. How so? Well, even though evolution doesn't say...
Defines evolution.
Yeah, so Why does a acorn become a oak tree? Well, today we'd say genetics. But Aristotle, given Aristotle's view, we could say, well, that goal is encoded in the genes.
Right.
So its objective is to, not intelligently, but its objective is to become an oak tree. That's literally its program. Although people who do evolution don't like the idea of
And that's why it gets me so bad. I mean, I hate it. Because they come up with these thoughts and ideas that is way off of everything. And then they want to teach people to say it's so, when it's, like they say, it's theory, but you can't tell people, you can't teach people theory to be true when it's just a theory. And they try to make it a fact. And it's way off.
Well,
It's like you just said, it's encoded within the acorn to be ultimately, if it's planted and grows, to be an oak tree. But they try to make it something totally different.
Well, a person who accepts evolution would say, yes, of course, the acorns get the genetic code, but they would say that's all that's the result of just random natural selection. So that no purpose.
Again, that don't follow any code of ethics or anything. I mean, if it's encoded in, it can't be just random.
Well, they'd say the argument from natural selection is that you have random, mutations, etc., and then the ones that don't work get selected by being killed.
The strongest
Yeah.
live, the weakest die out.
Yeah, so you end up with something that looks, they would say it looks designed, because anything that doesn't work has.
But it's still following the same code. I mean, whether it's from the weakest or the strongest. I mean, if it's designed to become an oak tree, it's gonna be an oak tree. It's not gonna be a pine tree because it was one of the strongest trees acorns out there. So it's still following that embedded code that's in that acorn. If the deer was a deer when it's born, it's gonna be a deer at the end. Now, it may have some changes due to genetic makeup of the mother or father deer, but it's still gonna be a deer. And it's gonna follow that genetic code. So that's why I say they come up with some way off stuff and then try to make you think, oh, this is right. That's why I have problems with it,
Well, the evolutionary theorists would agree about all the genetic stuff, but they would say, sure, a deer has got the genetic code to become a deer. It won't, unless it's altered it won't become something else. But they would say that the existence of that, deer, it was the result not of intent, but simply natural random selection. However things began, millions of years of natural selection, then eventually you get a deer. That'd be their.
See, but that's something that you just said two different things. That's what I'm saying.
Oh,
You eventually become something else. No, you don't eventually become nothing else. You're gonna be whatever it is with whatever changes you added to it. For instance, when he was talking about the mating of the different plants, how you become some light, some this color, some that other. You still got the same plant. You just got the variation because of the different. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's good stuff.
The genetic differences of DNA that's in there. So, but it's the same thing. It's everything is. If I add green to blue, it's gonna be a different color, but it's the same matter, right? It's just got you different qualities in it because you add the blue to the yellow to make it green. Am I not correct?
Well, if you have something if you take something you add that's already colored green, you add more blue to it, you
Right.
just change the color.
That's all. But it's the same substance. It's the same thing. It just got different qualities.
Well, just changing the color,
Yeah. So, but they say something totally different. But anyway, I digress.
Now, so the way Aristotle, avoids the view that there's an intelligence, guiding it all, which is something embraced by later thinkers, is this claim that built into it is this impetus to achieve its end. And again, the genetics provides a pretty good analogy. The idea being that it's sort of like, metaphorically speaking, coded to do that. And the coding is what can be called the entelechy, which is the final stage of a process. So his view is everything is built into it, these objectives. And again, you can use the analogy of a autonomous drone that's programmed to go do its flight pattern, and that's wired into it. And he would say similarly for everything. It's wired into it to do that. So it's not like a drone that's piloted by somebody. The coding is within it, or so he claimed. And then of course he died. Now one of the things that he comes up with, which has a huge influence on theology and science to this day, is his famous or infamous unmoved mover. Now again, his view is that the way the world works is things go from potentially something to actually something. So it's this actualization. And so the initial matter is simply a collection of potentials. And one example of this is the potential to move. Now, Aristotle, contrary to, we'll see this when we talk about Thomas Aquinas, contrary to views put forth in most religions, believed in a universe that is uncreated. There is no beginning, there is no end. It's an eternal universe. Now, of course, we still have this debate today. Namely, has the universe always been, or was there like a time before the universe? And then people get into the question of, was there a time before time? People say, no, there can't be, because you can't have before time, because that would be time. Aristotle, in a way, solves the problem, or confuses it, by saying there was no before, the universe has always been. It's an eternal, uncreated universe. Now, then you might say, well, how could there be a mover if it's always been? Well, his claim is not that there was a being that created it all, that it's always been, but his claim is there is a source of motion for everything, and this is the unmoved mover. Why must the unmoved mover be unmoved? Well, because of the problem of the infinite regress. And here's how the argument goes. Now, for Aristotle, being a pagan, the unmoved mover is not God. Why not? Well, he considers this, that the unmoved mover is like a being that is intelligent. But he says, if a being could care, that means that it could be moved. Both, metaphorically, moved emotionally, but also, of course, non-metaphorically, actually altered. So the unmoved mover doesn't care about us. It also, not in a cruel way, in the same sense that, like, tables and chairs don't care about us. It's not that they dislike us, it's they are just incapable of caring. Now, the unmoved mover itself, obviously, is unmoving, because unmoved. This means that it can't be an efficient cause, because it's not, moving, it's not itself moving and imparting movement. His view is it's a final cause, because all things try to be like the unmoved mover. So it moves them, crudely put, by attracting them. They try to be like it. It's the final cause.
So what is he saying? Is a mover? What is he saying is a mover if it's not God or something like that?
Oh, in terms of what it is?
Yeah, what is a mover?
Well, it's not God. It doesn't care. But it's the final cause. All things are trying to be like it. So, to use a terrible metaphor, think of like how moths are attracted to a light. The light is not moving them in the sense that it's not grabbing them and pulling them or pushing them. They are simply drawn to the light. And so if using the metaphor, the light or the unmoved mover is, being all one can be, and so we're pulled to it. It's our goal or objective, but it's not, well, it's not really pulling us, we are going towards it. So it is causing us, because if you say, why are the moths going to the light? Well, they're caused to go to it, but it's not actually, pulling them to it. They're moving to it. So the sun move mover doesn't move itself, but it moves other things. So why does it do this? Well, as we'll see, it is in some ways kind of godlike, but kind of not. First, it is the highest degree of reality. It need not change because it's the best. So what is it doing? Well, its claim is this, and this is where it becomes, again, kind of like God, but kind of not. It's engaged in the highest activity of all. And Aristotle, being a philosopher, takes this to be, well, what do philosophers do?
Just ask a question.
Yeah. Thinking, so it's engaged in this thinking. Now, for Aristotle, we're the highest of creatures because we think, we're rational, we're the rational animal. So, this entity, in a way, one way to look at it is, in religion they talk about how humans are created in the image of God, and similarly here. We're rational, our highest activity according to Aristotle is thinking, and we imitate the unmoved mover whose highest activity is thought.
Question. Now, if the unmoved thinker is thought, and we're the highest thinkers, so that evidently means that the unmoved thinker is higher than we are, right?
Way higher.
Therefore, now, if we're trying to gravitate to it, but it does not care about us, we're not thinking too brilliantly.
Well, it doesn't care about us.
But then if it doesn't care, why would I gravitate to you and you don't care about me?
Oh, because,
It's not a hostile type of care.
yeah,
It
yes.
just doesn't consider you.
Say that again.
It's not a hostile type of like, oh, I don't care about you. It's more of like, you're not really concerned about it. Like if an ant were to walk by you, you wouldn't really pay it too much of attention.
Or think of things that don't care about us that we're still drawn to. For example, if someone is sick, penicillin doesn't care about them, but they're still drawn to it. Money doesn't care about us, but people are still drawn to money. Similarly, you might have, you raise a good point. You think of like a doctor, our professional may not care about you, but it's not in the sense that they, because we now use the term, as you said, we use the term they don't care in a negative, like like they're actively hostile to us. So if someone says they don't care about you, we think, oh, you must hate me. It's like, no, it's just a lack of care. And so you can have someone who's a dispassionate professional who does an amazing job, but without any feeling. And then weirdly, they've actually argued that doctors shouldn't, especially psychologists, shouldn't be emotionally attached because it'll screw them up. Because if they're too connected to their patients and all their traumas, they'll just be messed up. They have to, in a way not care. Yeah, so the unmoved mover doesn't care about us, but it provides like this, perfect exemplar. Or you could use another analogy. Think of like in business or sports, someone who is just way better, but you aim to be like them, even though they might not know or care anything about you. So in a way, it kind of works like that. It's not that, for example, if you want to be like a great tennis player, it's not that Serena Williams or Venus Williams would hate you. She doesn't care because she doesn't know any of us. But it could still be, she could be like your unmoved mover, where you're trying to be like her. So she drives you on, even though she don't care. Not in a mean way. She just doesn't know. She doesn't know who we are. So what is it thinking about? Well, it can't be thinking about particulars, because if it was, it'd be constantly changing. So it is to think about what is unchanging and undivided. So it's thinking about thinking. So in a way, it's kind of doing, doing thinking on thinking, but in a way it's kind of doing nothing. Because there's no change. It's like, one way to look at it is like perfect thought. Now later, these Neoplatonists like this and kind of ran with it to some crazy ends. And of course, also, as we'll see when we get to our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas, this becomes a model for God. Now, of course, the big difference is, even though this being is thinking, and is, you know, the final cause of all things, we're trying to be like this being. It doesn't care about us. So it's not moved by prayers, you can't pray to it, it doesn't offer salvation, there's no afterlife, we're just, again, going back to the metaphor, it's like being, you know, in a sport where you have the person who is best, who doesn't care about you or know you, but you're pulled towards your full potential, trying to be like them.
So, help me, man. If I'm not a new mover, is Aristotle saying that he's this unmoved mover, moves things about in the universe, right?
Well, it moves things in the same way that a great tennis player would move other tennis players who never play against her. It would be not so much that she would be like a coach, making them better, it's that they'd be drawn to be like her. So the movement that it causes is not like literal, it's not like, if you want to be a great tennis player, it's not like, you know, Serena Williams would be pushing you along. It's that you'd be aware of her greatness and you'd try to be like her, but it wouldn't be her doing anything to you. It just, she would be the cause, because the reason why you're trying to do that is because of her. So she causes you to improve, even though she's actually not moving, you know, she's not doing the other stuff too. She's not like coaching you or actively involved with you. The metaphor does break down, but you can think of this as kind of like an ideal or a hero that you never actually meet, but they're the reason you are trying to be that great, you know. And people can have, you know, to go with the metaphor, people can have as heroes, people are long dead. You know, so they're not having, they can't do anything now because they're dead, but people are still pulled to be like them.
So an example would be like you go to a job, in order so you can be able to, earn money and take care of like your responsibilities. That's what moves you, and that's the unmoved movement in that sense.
Yeah, because it could be like this ideal of being, a provider, and you could have an ideal that, it's not the ideal doing stuff to you, it's that you're trying to reach that goal. And it's causing you to do it, but not by like being an efficient cause or material cause. It's by being your goal. Yeah, so the unmoved mover is the goal.
But he's not trying to display it on like a person.
Oh no, it doesn't.
Or something that exists, such as like God or something.
Yeah, doesn't offer salvation, doesn't care. Again, it'd be like a great, or even better, like a dead hero. They're dead, they don't care. Except in this case, he's not dead. But it'd be like a distant, hero who doesn't know about you or care about you, but it's still like an exemplar that you aim for.
So it's more like a goal or something like that.
Yeah. So
causes you to accelerate or
yeah. So we're
improve yourself.
yeah. So we're striving to fully be what we are, and this is the pull. According to Aristotle, that's the cause. Then the mover is, we recognize that as the greatest, and we're trying to be like that. Just like a person might try to be like one of their heroes or idols.
That's why he says it's pure thought.
Yes, yeah. And then of course, Aristotle dies. Now this segues us finally into part 2. Total screen glare. Okay, so part 2 takes us into a look at God, properties, and reality, and of course substance. Now, before getting into the actual dead philosophers, and maybe some living ones, we need look a bit at some methodology. Now, we saw back in the ancient days the notion of the reductio ad absurdum. Now, one question that, of course, arises. Oh. Oh, slightly improved. Now, we saw back in the ancient days the idea of reductio ad absurdum. And we saw it's a method where you try to prove something by assuming it's not true and then deriving an absurdity. Or alternatively, try to disprove something by assuming it's true and deriving an absurdity. Now, when you're trying to talk about like the origin of all the things doing the cosmology, an excellent question is what kind of toolkit can you use? And before we had things like, you know, deep-looking telescopes and so forth, trying to physically, you know, see the beginnings of things, we had to think about stuff. And one of the tools that was used to think about the beginning of all things is a combination of the reductio ad absurdum with some regresses. And let us see these. Now, when it comes to regresses, there's two main flavors, the circular and the infinite. Now, of course, anybody who's done math would say, hey, circles are infinite. And the answer is yes, they are. But there's the one that's like infinitely circular, and then there's the non-circular infinite regress. Circular regress is something you know, everyone's familiar with, because everyone's heard the classic conundrum, in order to get a job, you've got to have experience. In order to get experience, you've got to have a job. Now, if that were true, it would create a circular regress. And the problem would be, of course, that if it were true that a job required experience and experience required a job, you could never get either. Because without a job, you couldn't have experience. Without experience, you couldn't have a job, so no one could have jobs. So circular regresses are bad because you can never break into the circle. It'd be kind of like, I remember when I was a kid, people get the merry-go-round going super fast, and then people would try to jump onto it, usually catch a thing in their face or something. It's called natural selection. Yeah. Back then, they just said, parents were just like, go for it, you know, make you tired. So you're good at jumping on merry-go-rounds, you're jumping off. Now, so the circular regress would be like an unbreakable merry-go-round. If you try to jump into it, it would just metaphorically kill you. So those are bad. Now, if you could show that something created a circular regress, that would create an impossibility, hence an absurdity. So assuming something is true, we lock into a circular regress, then you could say that can't be true. I mean, take the job experience one. If it really were true that you couldn't get a job without experience and experience without a job, no one would have jobs. And therefore no one has jobs, so that's clearly not true, because people do have jobs. Second type of regress is the infinite regress. And the idea is that each step in a process requires a completion of another step onto infinity, which of course also makes it impossible, because we saw this earlier, talked about Zeno's paradox of motion, because if I have to go, you know, to get to the desk, I've got to go halfway, and then halfway to the halfway, halfway to the halfway to the halfway, and I have to cover an infinite amount of distance, which I cannot do, so I can never get to the desk. And also my favorite metaphor for this, or example, is the evil bureaucrat, which I mentioned before. You go to get financial aid, someone says, but of course, I'm from the government, I'm here to help. All you have to do is fill out the form for requesting financial aid. And you say, okay, can I have that form? I say, but of course. All you have to do to get the form for requesting financial aid is fill out the form for requesting the form for requesting financial aid. And then so on, you know, every form is another form, which means you can never get your financial aid. So if you can show that something leads to an infinite regress, then that's an automatic absurdity. And so for example, there's a super easy way to prove with an infinite regress and Reductio Ad Absurdum that there had to be a non-human origin to humans. Now to do this, what we'd say is that every human has to have human parents. Now it starts off kind of plausible because everybody's got, well, two biological parents. Although now they're working on ways to throw in like 3 or 4 or more. We'll get into that. So it seems to make sense. You know, parents have, you know, parents themselves, and so on. But the problem is this: if every human has to have human parents, then you would have an infinite regress, because every person you have, human you have, would have to have parents, which means they would have to have parents, and they would have to have parents, and they would have to have parents to infinity. The only way to stop the regress is you have to have a human who do not have human parents. Now, people who are religious would say, of course, God or the gods. People who are atheists would say Big Bang or something else. And so this is kind of the standard argument used in talking about origins of things. And by this reasoning, we had to have like something that originated us that was not human. And people, of course, also use this to argue about the origin of the universe. That there had to be something that caused the universe, if there's a cause to it, that is not itself the universe. And people would say this is God or event 0. Unless you're Nietzsche, in which case you say you've got an eternal reoccurrence, and so there was no beginning and there's no end. Stay away from Nietzsche. It's terrible. Now, first what we'll look at in looking at God and substance and stuff is sort of the direct, in many ways, direct successor to our good dead friend Aristotle. And what Thomas Aquinas does here from his Instagram account, good angler, he essentially takes Aristotle, and if you think of Aristotle's work as like a layer of a cake, he puts another layer on top of it, a Christian layer. So you get the pagan layer, then the Christian layer on top. Aquinas was born in 1224, died in 1274, still dead today. But he's a dead saint.
Why do the BCE years go down?
Oh, good question. Because AD originally was Anno Domino. Now just means like, it's the same system, but they take a religious aspect. And BCE is before a Christian era. So the reason why it goes back is because it measures it negatively. So it's the amount of years they are from 0. Yeah, so pre-BCE are all negative measurements. And then the rest is positive, which is a mess, but there you go. Yeah, calendars that start at 0 make more sense. That's why. Now, he was born into a noble family. And back in those days, if you were in a noble family, your parents would want you, if you were a man, to either like go into the nobility, but of course there can only be one heir. But you always want more, because you want an heir to spare in case the heir died or something. But then you gotta do something with all those, extra sons. Daughters you just marry off, to other people, because they're property and stuff. That's how they saw it, for the most part. Now, the other sons, of course, would be put off to the church, given to give positions of authority, because the church was super powerful back then. Now, his parents wanted him to go into the church and be part of the powerful hierarchy, but he had other ideas. He wanted to go into a monastic order that was dedicated to learning and charity, both of which involve no power or real influence. And so, of course, they locked him up in a tower, kind of like a Rapunzel scenario, but without lots of hair. And so they kept saying, when are you going to go and get powerful in the clergy? He's like, I'm never going to do that. I'm just going to sit here and read my books, play some video games. What are those? I don't know. But eventually his family relented. They said, well, you can't get you to go into go and become powerful, okay, go do it. And he ended up becoming the most famous, of course, because no one now remembers the Count of Kino except insofar as, his association with Thomas Aquinas. So Tommy for the win. Now his teacher was a fellow named Albert the Great, because he was super great. And one of the objectives of St. Thomas was to reconcile the Catholic Church with the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now even before the Protestant Reformation, Christianity was already divided, because you had the Roman Empire, West, the original one, falls around 434 AD, and then the Eastern Empire, centered in Constantinople, lasts another 1,000 years. And so Christianity still, is split. And that becomes the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is still very influential in Russia today. If you see pictures of Russia and the churches with those nice, onion domes, that's Eastern Orthodox. And so we hope to reunite the churches. How'd that go? Yeah, it didn't work, but when was the last time, though, there was a big war between Christians about Christianity? A long time ago. So, good. So less murder. Lower murder levels, good. Now, even though he wrote a lot of stuff, at the end of his life, he had either had something great happen or something terrible. Probably both. He had a mystical experience in which he believed that all his written works were like straw, were like nothing. Which on one hand would be terrible. Imagine spending your life creating all this work and then having a revelation that tells you everything you've done is worthless. But if you get to see God, totally worth it. He was canonized in 1323, which of course is to be shot out of the cannon. No, it's to become a saint. Still a process today. And of course you got to be dead to be a saint. So if there's applications for sainthood, always keep that in mind. And then in 1879, Pope Leo XIII put him forth as a model of Catholic thought. Now, in addition to his influence in Christianity, he has been hugely influential in philosophy in general, also in political thought and legal thought. Super important dead guy. Now, of course, he's got a cool backstory. His nickname, and all serious philosophers have nicknames, his, of course, was the Ox, because he was gentle and big and usually pretty quiet. So they called him the Dumb Ox. Now, he, of course, had a wicked wit hidden behind that, passive, that gentle exterior. At one point, his fellow monks decided to play a trick on him and ran to him and told him there was a cow flying over the monastery. So he runs to the window to look, and they, of course, all laugh at him. And they said, Thomas, Thomas, how could you believe a cow could fly? And he turns to them and says, I would rather believe that a cow could fly than a fellow Christian would lie to me, which is a pretty good burn. So he originated the burn. In addition to his philosophical views, originates that. Now, when he wasn't doing burns on people, he wrote a lot of stuff. He had 4 scribes working and produced about 25 volumes, with his great work being appropriately named the Summa Theologica, or Great Theology, which is a really big book. Now, our focus, of course, will be on his metaphysics, and to close for today, one of the things that happened in Europe was Plato pretty much dominated European thought during much of the Middle Ages. Then, around the 12th and 13th century, through the Middle East, the works of Aristotle finally became available again in Western Europe. And this had a dramatic influence. And next time on the Friday, we'll pick up with our story of how Aristotle changed the Western world long after his death. So have a good rest of the week. I'll see you on the Friday.